and welcome everyone to our very first symposium in our science education series at virtual Regeneron ISEF. I'm Caitlin Sullivan, our Director of Outreach and Equity Programs at Society for Science in the Public. Although we can't be together this year in person, this virtual event gives us the unique opportunity to share the advice and expertise of many of our student research and STEM education supporters with a much broader audience. So thank you to our audience for joining us today. In this session, we are going to be speaking with three people who support STEM research and STEM education programs through fundraising. We're hoping that through this session, you'll be able to walk away with some new ideas and some new approaches to fundraising for your own STEM education program. And I'd like to start today by inviting each of our panelists to introduce themselves. Liz, you've been to the most ISEF. Let's start with you.
Thanks so much, Caitlin. I'm really excited to be here because my first ISEF was in 2002 as an 8th grade observer, and I've been almost every single year since then. Being able to be here and share what I've learned through my experience in fundraising for a science fair and a science education nonprofit is thrilling because the science fair had a huge impact on my life, and I know that all of you want to have that same impact. I've been fundraising for SARSEF since about 2002, and I look forward to sharing all the things that I've learned.
All right, thank you so much, Liz. All right, next let's turn to my colleague, Bruce.
Thank you, Caitlin. I'm really delighted to be here today, and I'm the Chief Advancement Officer of Society for Science in the Public, and I have the privilege of raising money for the Regeneron International Science and Engineering Fair, the Regeneron Science Talent Search, and Broadcom Masters, and other programs that we have at the Society, and I hope that some of my thoughts will be of interest to people watching.
Thank you, Bruce. And next, let's turn to Frida, who has served as one of the Society's lead advocates, the Research Teachers Conference captain, and she is a great supporter and user of our Science News in High Schools program.
Hi, Caitlin and everyone here. It's a pleasure to be here. I am so excited, and the conference has been going great so far. Frida Vine. I am a science teacher and a STEM program coordinator here at Clark High School in the Clark County School District. I've been involved in fundraising, grant writing for the past 6-7 years, and the monies we collected were primarily for funding robotics and all of those other STEM-related programs at our school. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to all three of you for joining us today. I'd like to start with our first question, which is, how did you get started fundraising, and what was the first funding you ever secured for a STEM program? Liz, let's start with you.
So, as I alluded to earlier, I started fundraising actually because I was selected as a Broadcom Masters nominee in middle school. Back then, it was the Discovery Young Scientist Challenge, and our community really took note. And so my local science fair said, hey, we would love for you to come out and thank our biggest sponsors and just tell them about your trip in Washington, D.C. and what it was like. And little did I know that just doing that simple thank you and having that connection with sponsors is a really crucial part of fundraising. And it's just telling that story. And that's actually what led to the first major gift that I got. I entered a speech competition to present basically the journey of our fair from becoming a science fair to a nonprofit and the effects that it had on all of the students in Southern Arizona. And I ended up winning $15,000. So what I learned is when you make that really emotional connection about why this is important, as well as the logic, people are sure to give money and they really appreciate hearing your passion.
All right, thank you, Liz. Frida, let's turn to you next.
This has always been my passion. I started the STEM program at our school about 6 years ago by pulling in the technology, math uh, team together. Uh, Eventually, we called it the STEAM Club. As we all know, money is the big issue here, and I started looking out for all of these resources, just basically scouring the internet and making phone calls. I've been successful. I've been able to secure almost 4,000 in grant money from various organizations, and we have used this to fund a robotics program. The first company that gave me the green light was a company called National Securities Technologies, or NASTEC as they call it, and they were a strong STEM supporter, and they gave it to me 3 years back to back, which I thought was wonderful. The next company really strongly supported our program was CenturyLink, again, back-to-back support. So it has worked out well. I strongly believe the passion should be there, strong team collaboration for success in our ventures.
All right, thank you, Frida. And Bruce, how about you? How did you get your start?
Well, it was a long time ago, but in third grade, I didn't raise my hand and say I wanted to be a fundraiser. I believe that people get into this field through their passion, through the field that they love, whether it's social work, education, healthcare, or culture, or some other kind of activity that they have a passion for. And I came in through culture. I was in New York City as a budding theatrical producer, and every nonprofit that I worked for needed help fundraising, and I got drawn into it that way. They could barely get to opening night without, we've got to raise some money. So I got into fundraising that way. I went and got my master's in nonprofit administration. And then I went on and found out that fundraising for education and fundraising for cancer research at one point in my life, and other disease fundraising, I mean, that kind of fundraising is so much easier than cultural fundraising, which people view as entertainment. So, the critical things in our lives, like education and healthcare, are the things that people they're more willing to support and are inspired to support. My first STEM fundraising experience came with Drexel University and their capital campaign. I helped raise money for a new Drexel University College of Engineering research building, which was very gratifying.
All right, great. Well, you all definitely share a passion for the things that you raise funds for. All right, well, I'm sure a lot of our audience is looking for some advice. So I was wondering if you would share with us what types of organizations you would recommend others look to as possible funding sources. Frida, let's start with you.
There's always been plenty of grant money out there, just ready for the asking. The hardest part is finding it. Now, given the COVID-19 situation, we can expect the philanthropic landscape to change. Sources that we could consider are individuals, as Bruce has reiterated, celebrities, rich alumni who have been successful and gone down the STEM path, major corporations whose goods and services are STEM related, local organizations, foundations, and so on. Now, there are some organizations that strongly support educational ventures. And let's begin with your organization, the Society for Science, through their STEM Action Grants and their STEM Research Grants to teachers leading students into scientific research. I think it's great that you have funded the initiatives of teachers across the country and organizations, nonprofit organizations across the country. Other grant-giving organizations, and make a note of this is current because I just checked it out and applied for one. The National Education Foundation is offering COVID-19 grants, learning and leadership grants, and student achievement grants. Just go to the NEA Foundation website. Others, I'll be fast here, others include the National Science Foundation, Samsung, Toshiba, Walmart. Walmart is really cool. They have their community grants. In fact, it was the second grant I got. I was amazed that they even picked me up, that little drop in the ocean. I got a grant from them. Wells Fargo, CenturyLink, an internet provider. Yeah, that's it for now. But if there is a follow-up question, I'd be happy to answer that later.
Thank you, Frida. Yeah, it sounds like you have a wide variety of sources, and we appreciate you offering, suggesting the Society's support programs. The STEM research grants, of course, provide funding to teachers for equipment for student research projects. Anything from beakers and test tubes to maybe a portable greenhouse, those kinds of things. And our STEM Action Grant support innovative, small, nonprofit, grassroots organizations that have unique STEM initiatives. So those are great opportunities. Bruce, let's turn to you next. What types of organizations do you recommend folks look to for funding?
I think it's very individualized for the specific circumstances of the organization. I feel that I mean, I always look to corporations, foundations, and individuals, and I think in STEM research programs and competitions, corporations are going to be the fastest responders to your appeals because they'll really get it. Corporations with a STEM interest, whether it's in healthcare, pharmaceuticals, or technology or engineering, will understand the kinds of things that you're talking about quickly, and they'll respond relatively quickly. If you're fortunate enough to be in a region with foundations that have an area of interest in STEM and education, then you may be fortunate to get some grants from those foundations in your region. And then, of course, you may find some individuals that are connected with you that can provide significant support.
Thank you, Bruce. Liz, how about you? Where would you recommend folks look when they're looking for funding for science fairs or other STEM programs?
You know, we had the best success with really keeping local. This was the 65th anniversary of our science fair, and we grew it from all volunteer and very bare bones to well, now we're over $1 million nonprofit as a whole. And the way that we were able to do that was really by building our reputation in the community and building those relationships. So honestly, for us, it was as simple as keeping a notepad in the car and writing down every STEM-related organization that we saw as we drove down the street. It can be difficult because when you're in this arena, everything is STEM. And once you start to kind of use this as like almost a mindfulness practice as you're driving, you're going to see so many opportunities and so many businesses who want an informed and educated workforce. And that's the biggest selling point that I have, is going in and saying, hey, I'd just like to tell you about the benefits of our science fair to the community and learn about what your company does. And I've yet to meet a business leader who doesn't want a student who can look at data, who can draw their own conclusions, who knows how to think through a problem and can solve it on their own. And those are all skills that you get from doing amazing science and engineering research. One tangible suggestion I have as well, just to piggyback on Frida's suggestion, is Walmart community grants. Even I wish that we had known about them before. Every site has $5,000 that they can give in a certain amount of time. And so we applied to 25 stores last year and ended up with $20,000. And it's just a very simple application that you do for each site, store site, and you go through their website. So if you're nervous about writing, I'd say start with that. It's easy and it's not a big use of your time.
Thank you, Liz. And you started to speak a little bit to how you approach sponsors, and I want to ask Bruce and Frida in just a moment about that. But I've heard that you have a lot of individuals who provide funding for your programs. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, our individuals have been our slowest area of growth. It's taken the most time. And that's very counterintuitive to a lot of kind of typical nonprofit practices. A lot of people just assume that since we have so many alumni and parents who are seeing the direct benefit of science fair, they're going to immediately be donors. And that was absolutely not the case for us. However, we've been able to build that up, but it's taken years. So please don't be discouraged if you're a fair director who's pulling their hair out because everybody's telling you things should be a certain way. We found that the best way to do that was to engage them was through newsletters monthly, reminding them about all of the great experiences that they had, and then asking for a lot of interactive, asking them for advice or words of encouragement to our ISEF students, finding any excuse to get our individuals engaged. And the same goes for companies as well, because each company is run by a person who's giving out that money. And everyone loves being asked for their advice or their input.
Okay, thank you. Bruce, why don't we go to you next? Maybe you can talk a little bit about how do you approach a sponsor when you have something that you need funding for?
To pick up on what Liz was just saying about corporations. Corporations really want to be good corporate citizens of their area. They want to be known as being supportive of education and of programs in the area. So they benefit. They know that they will benefit from the association with your programs, and you can tell them your story and get them connected that way. And also, corporations in the STEM fields really appreciate being sort of branded among the next generation of innovators, students in STEM, and they want to know, they want those students to know about their companies, and so they can consider them for future opportunities. Foundations, I find very different because they have a sort of IRS-approved charter that they have to follow. You're actually doing them a favor when you appeal to them because they are required to give away a certain amount of funding every year, and you can help them if you're in a program that is in their area of their charter, and you can. That's a great way to appeal to a foundation, is to say that you're in you're partners in the same mission, and they will frequently give you money. Individuals, of course, are a little different. You've got to inspire them, and each person is very different. But tell them your story and inspire them.
Bruce, can you follow up a little bit more on your talk about individuals? I know the Society has a really robust alumni program where we engage alumni. What are some of the opportunities that the Society offers to alumni that helps to get them engaged?
We reach out to alumni and make them aware of our all of our programs, and many are very inspired. The thing that's most interesting about our alumni is that the competitions like ISEF, Science Talent Search, and Broadcom Masters were transformative. I think Liz already spoke about that. I mean, it's a very amazing experience for them. It changes their lives, changes the trajectory of their lives, and many alumni really strongly remember that when you reach out to them, and they want to support the organization that helped transform their lives. So we frequently have people that we have kind of re-engaged with after a number of years of being alumni, and suddenly they want to give us very significant support. Frequently, they're supporting the whole organization rather than a specific program, and we appreciate that. There's also opportunities to give to an endowment, give to specific program areas like science news in high schools and other programs that we have. Science news itself is an exciting area of support.
Thanks, Bruce. And we do a quick shout out to our alumni who not only provide funding for many of our programs, but also who give their time. In the environment that we're in right now, we had a large number of alumni who volunteered to help talk to some of our high school seniors who are trying to make decisions about what colleges to attend. So we appreciate alumni who pitch in that way as well. All right, Frida, let's go to you next. What advice do you have for approaching sponsors? And I also know that you have a lot of grant writing experience. So what are some tips for applying for grants?
I think Liz and Bruce pretty much covered the approaches or approaching potential sponsors. I'll just go directly to the applying for funding. Here is what we generally do, and I hope these suggestions help. This is what we have done. We've researched the organization, its mission statement, and located the right person to approach in the organization with questions. And next, we started by writing our story, describing in detail what our organization does, our demographics, who our students are, also showing that we have an A team of educators. We wrote the grant, and I'm kind of generalizing this. We wrote the grant putting ourselves in the shoes of the reviewers, very important, and gave them a detailed breakdown to support our dollar request. We made a commitment and promised deliverables such as the promise for media coverage. Organizations love to have their clientele know that they're involved in philanthropy. So media coverage to promote our grantors with supporting data, letting them know what would be the expected number of viewers. Finally, whether we won or not, we followed up with a thank you letter, emails, calls, even went as far as asking what we could do better the next time. That relationship is so important, and it's what keeps the dollars coming in.
Thank you, Frida. And there's one tip that you actually shared with some of our advocates for approaching grants, and you have used this tip when you've applied to our grants, and that is, if you apply for funding and you don't receive it, ask for feedback. The folks who are giving that funding out aren't always able to give feedback, but I really liked that you did reach out to us and ask for that. And then I think that is a way that funders know that you're interested, that you want to improve, and you want to make sure that you're reaching their goals as well as your own. So I think that's a good tip. Frida just started talking a little bit about how you maintain funder relationships. So Bruce, how do you make sure that those relationships continue to be positive? Because obviously you want funding for more than 1 year if possible.
Yes, I find that you need to show a lot of appreciation immediately upon receiving a gift, especially from individuals, since the gift is voluntary on their part. For corporations, you really need to show that they are getting the things, the benefits, or the program outcomes that they expected. And it's very important to prove that and show that they are receiving those benefits. And then foundations that have these strict IRS rules and are going to be requiring that you provide detailed reports that show that they gave their money to you and it was a wise decision and you had a good outcome within the area of their charter. So it's a little different for each of them, but I think appreciation is the underlying factor for all of them.
Yeah, I think that's very true. These funders really want to know that they're making an impact, and that is something that will keep them coming back. Liz, how about you? Do you have any other thoughts on how to maintain that relationship?
Yeah, it really, I think that it's all about that personal connection. Don't put any concepts of what you think a fundraiser should be on yourself. Really just make sure that you're playing to your strengths. If you're somebody who finds it easy to talk, pick up the phone and check in and say hello to that funder and let them know, if you're running a science fair, let them know what you're thinking about for this coming year, or ask for advice on something that you might want to do differently. If you find it a lot easier to write, do the same thing but via email. Just little check-ins and little updates can go a long way in keeping them engaged, because it's hard when you have an event that's only once a year. So it's really good to try to just remind them about that you exist, especially so that they have you in mind when they're thinking about their budgets for the next year. And a lot of these relationships can start out just by asking different businesses for volunteers or judges, because they want that visibility. It is so important that you recognize their role, and being willing, being able to say, just please give us about half a day of a few of your employees' time, and it's going to be a life-changing experience for a student. It's pretty hard to say no to that. Another great way to get them engaged is by utilizing your special awards. If you ask, local businesses all the way up to bigger businesses to donate, a neat STEM item or maybe $50 to encourage a student who's studying something that they're interested in, not only, of course, does that benefit that student and inspire them, but it benefits the organization because they're getting their name read out from your science fair stage. So it can be really small seeds of engagement to get them in to be wowed by your fair and to feel that transformational experience, and then they'll be inspired to do more.
That's great advice to really focus on starting small. Don't aim for the fences, so to speak. You can aim for the fences later. And one other thing that Bruce and his team have also taught me is that sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words. And if you're able to provide funders with pictures of the impact that they're making, that can go a long way too. Okay, great. Let's see. I think we have some questions from our audience now, so let's move up to those. Our first question is, for your organizations, what are some of the tools that you utilize? Lead management, communication platforms, and also what is your primary source for leads and contacts? So let's start with the tools that you utilize. Bruce, what are some of the tools that your team works with?
In a nutshell, every tool possible that we can find that will be helpful in raising money. Social media helps lay the groundwork and communicate awareness of the programs and the organization. Direct outreach, believe it or not, through hard mail. Good old-fashioned hard mail works really well in making people aware of our programs and bringing in funding. Email campaigns, e-appeals, it's an important tool as well. And then, sort of the face-to-face meeting, which now is happening on Zoom or just by telephone, reaching out and having these conversations with people, whether they're corporations, sessions, or individuals, telling your story. So those are important tools. There's a bunch of other tools that are related to data and stewardship, but I don't think I'll bore you with those.
I don't think they're boring at all. I think most of us, though, sometimes you start with an Excel spreadsheet, and then as you have more funding, you'll have funding for those more advanced tools. All right, thank you so much, Bruce. Liz, I have a question here for you. What is the base packet of materials that you utilize when you're approaching donors? So brochures, those kinds of things.
Yeah, so I have been our graphic designer until very recently when I hired on somebody with more skills than I have, as well as looking at actually, I wish that I had known that even your local Kinko's has somebody that can help with graphic design too. And so, sometimes it's as simple as starting in Word or PowerPoint and designing a flyer describing what the impact of your fair is. So that's always the biggest thing in my toolkit is what are the outcomes of the fair? What are the positive effects that this has on our students? And for us, that really started small. I used data from project registration, the questions that we asked permission to release an aggregate, such as diversity for gender and ethnicity and a percentage of students who are coming from areas of poverty to show that we're equalizing the STEM playing field. And then we also, as time went on, added questions on our project registration that were survey questions. So that way we had data to share with our grant makers that, showing students opinion about their STEM identity. And that's information that you can absolutely use and advertise. And quotes and pictures are, of course, a really important part of that. As a nonprofit, we have an annual report. So, of course, that's an important part of our packet. But I think the other most important thing to really kind of combine everything into one place is to have at least a flyer or a packet for what their sponsorship benefits would be. Because even if they're not as interested in the advertising side, it's always nice for them to see that you're thinking about how they'll benefit. So, are you going to put them on a certain number of banners, a certain number of tweets that'll go out to your social media network? And of course, email is another really cheap way to engage and recognize sponsors. So when you're sending out a normal email about fair registration deadlines, are you featuring sponsors' logos on that? Because that can have really wide reach. So make sure that you are using those email addresses that you're collecting on project registration and continuing to engage those people year after year, because that's who your sponsors want to see.
I think that's really good advice, especially the piece about having data to back up your programs. And if you're just starting out, sometimes that's just a survey of your attendees. So it's a place to start. And also sponsor recognition is really important. Okay, we have a question next for Frida. What advice can you give to younger fundraisers who are often counted out? Sometimes we have, students who form nonprofits while they're in high school. What advice would you have for them?
I would strongly advise them to do research on the internet, look for organizations that support youth initiatives. For example, here in Las Vegas, the city of Las Vegas has the YNAP program, which is Youth Neighborhood Program, where students are encouraged to do community projects, and they're given points, and they receive amounts up to $5,000. So there must be organizations like this in other cities that focus on high school students, university students, and basically have the student reach out to you, the adult, the more mature fundraiser, and work with you. People who write grants really make great mentors for students who take on these initiatives.
I would love to just add on that when I introduce myself as the CEO, I cannot tell you how often I get completely disregarded because it's like, you're too young, you know. So sometimes it's being a little sneaky about you don't have to necessarily make it clear that you are running the nonprofit that you're fundraising for. And after you build that relationship of trust and are focusing on doing the fundraising, your passion shines through. And if you're having a positive and quality relationship with a funder, they'll get to know you and trust you. And then when they see that you are the one that is behind it, you don't need to worry about it. So don't let age be a deterrent. And when I was in high school, my mom would come with me. And sometimes, you know, if you're running your own nonprofit, I'm sure that can be a little bit hard on your ego, but I'm sure that your parents want to be there and help support you. And sometimes bringing a board member along specifically will help give you a little bit more of that credibility that you should automatically have.
Thank you, Liz. Okay, Bruce, why don't you answer this one for us? How do you choose what funding to apply for? It's not always practical to apply to every single funding that you find online. Obviously, you can find just lists and lists of grants that are out there. If you don't have a lot of people or resources, how do you make those decisions?
There's some tools, Foundation Directory Online and GuideStar, where you can go in and search by geographical region as well as your own areas of interest. STEM research, STEM competitions, STEM education, for example, and find a limited list of sources of funding, both corporate and foundation sources, and including possibly family foundations, which are tied to individuals with a passion in the area that we're talking about. So I find that a very useful tool to start out with. Another thing that should not be overlooked is simply looking within your family, so to speak, the people that are connected to your organization, your own alumni, your own judges and teachers that are involved with your program and volunteers, and find out who they know, what kind of connections they have, as maybe a spouse works at a corporation that would be interested in providing some funding. And that's a way to get an introduction, reassure that person that they do not have to make the ask, because for some reason people are just terrified of asking for money, but they can make the introduction for you and help raise money that way.
Go ahead, Frida.
I'd like to add, piggyback on what Bruce has mentioned. Just wanted to suggest you visit the Grant Watch COVID-19 website. Again, it's Grant Watch COVID-19. I looked at it yesterday, and there's all kinds of grant opportunities in different areas of need, not just STEM education, but other fields also. Good luck with that.
Thank you, Frida. And that brings me along to our last question that I'd love for all of you to answer. And that is, in our current environment and also in future years when maybe things are a little different, how do you see fundraising for science fair and research programs changing and developing in the future? Let's begin with you, Liz.
I think that this crisis has really pushed innovation, and that the most nimble organizations are going to survive, and that includes science fairs, no matter what structure of funding that you're under in education programs, because as we go from virtual to in-person and back and forth, we're going to have to really think flexibly about how not only we're engaging our funders and giving them opportunities and recognition, but of course how we're going to continue to serve our mission of reaching the students and encouraging and inspiring them. And so the biggest piece of advice that I have is to make decisions early. We've made some tough decisions all the way through July of 2021. But because we're making them now, we know that we have time to go to funders who we think are going to support new initiatives, especially who are interested in technology and are willing to be seen as supporting, innovative and pioneering new opportunities, as well as in keeping our current funders informed. So I think that the more certain and confident you can be, and the more that you can communicate to your donor base, as well as all of your participants, that you are very aware of what's going on, and you're going to make plans to make it the best that it can possibly be, is really what we'll have to do. As everyone said, the funding landscape is changing, and none of us can predict that. So I think that the best thing that all of us can do is try to diversify and think about new creative ways that we can engage our funders and keep them informed, even if we can't physically be together at ISEF.
Thank you, Liz. Frida, how about you? How do you see fundraising for your research program changing or developing in the coming years?
I'd like to make reference to two great sessions you had during this fair. One was Excellence in Science and Technology. I believe it was on the first day. And the other one was yesterday, I believe, Technology During COVID, where you had many young research scientists, and they brought up some really good pointers, some ideas to work on for the future. Now, fundraising, as I see it, continues with engaging and empowering early career scientists, such as your panelists, to extend and enhance their scientific research endeavors. And for the future, as more seasoned professionals, we must look to supporting them, these young scientists, in their efforts for securing funding. We can step back and give them the tools. And of course, the focus will be on technology, biomedical, pharmaceuticals, etc. Of course, as Bruce, I think it was Bruce who mentioned the one-on-one, the personal touch. Keep making those calls, keep the relationship warm, and this paves the way for ongoing success and support.
Thanks, Frida. And Bruce, what are your thoughts?
I agree with everything Liz and Frida had said already about adjusting to the new world that we're in. But there's one thing that I really want to add to that and point out for all STEM-related and research-related organizations in science and engineering. We're viewed as part of the solution, and a lot of nonprofits are seeing a significant downturn due to the economic difficulties these days. But the organizations that are seen as being part of solving and helping with this pandemic and future pandemics, I think people are becoming aware that this can happen again. And STEM competitions, the next generation of innovators, STEM.
2 seconds left, please. So sorry, I apologize.
For all they're all part of the solution. So emphasize with your supporters.
Thank you, Bruce. I'm so sorry about that. We are out of time. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us, and we hope that you enjoy the rest of your week at Virtual Regeneron ISEF. Thank you.